It is time for a little rock racing action. Check out what arrived here at the RC Driver Workshop. This is the Redcat Racing Camo X4 Pro. This is a brushless four-wheel drive rock racing buggy. And you know what? I really wish we had rock racing over here on the East Coast, some Ultra 4 action. It would just be so cool to go and watch it. But since I can't do that, this is the next best thing for me. I can't wait to run this thing. I've had my eye on it for quite a while now, and I'm just really excited to hear and I get to share it with you guys. But let's go over all the details, of course, and let's start off with the rock racing style buggy shell that we have on here. Roll cage setup. It looks pretty cool. Nice job on this one, Redcat. I've already pulled off the body clips. 4 body clips hold it in place. It's kind of got this digital camo thing going on here with some red pinstriping, some black sections, and a lot of this is printed on the inside, the scheme of it, but all the writing is decals on there. But this is basically one panel here, or one body section. Then we've got the roof panel. The interior is a separate Lexan piece as well. And then the driver's heads are actually molded heads, which is pretty cool. And then inside, of course, we've got the inner roll cage. So this is a pretty stiff cage. I hope it's going to help, brace everything up. And here, seems like it. We've got some fake fire extinguishers on the side. That's pretty cool. Overall, pretty neat look. I think it really sets the tone for a rock racing buggy. Definitely like that. All right, now let's check out the chassis and, of course, the drivetrain, all the details on the inside of this. And right up front here, this might look familiar if you're a frequent viewer of the channel. This is basically the Ducono front end on it. I went and pulled that truck off the shelf just to double check, and yeah, it's pretty much the Ducono front end from the suspension arms all the way to the front gearbox assembly, shock tower and all. I mean, even the front bumper. So, this front bumper looks very cool on here, pretty rock racer-like. And then we move back to the shock tower, composite shock tower. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm going to link a card up to the Ducono just so you could check out that video as well, because there might be some extra details in there that may help you out when you're checking this thing out. But anyway, back to this. So the suspension arms on here are pretty stiff, pretty rigid caster blocks and steering knuckles on here. What I like is the suspension links are adjustable on this. So we've got some steel links. And I do have to say that I did go and adjust these out of the box. There's some positive camber and positive toe in this, and I went and I adjusted it already because it was kind of bothering me a little bit. So just keep that in mind. You want to go and basically start at 0 for everything, 0 toe, 0 camber, and that's a good starting point for your suspension setup. But it is good that you are capable of adjusting that. What I really like about this front end is the shocks on here. These shocks are nice and plush. It's an aluminum bodied shock on here, and it is threaded, so you could adjust the collars to adjust your spring preload on here. There are plastic caps on the top, which, they look pretty bulky, so that should work out just fine. I like that they sit on metal posts, so that's pretty cool. And there are bleeder screws in there, so that's really nice if you're going and really tuning this vehicle for rock racing. You can go bleed your shocks properly. Like that setup. Overall, pretty cool. If you do watch that Ducono video, definitely watch the performance report at the end. I had a little issue with the shock tower, and we'll see how this works there. But just to get all the information, again, check that video out. All right, now onto the drivetrain portion of the front end. Front differential is a metal gear differential. You could go and adjust, you could put different grease in there or oils to adjust the viscosity on the inside. Metal out drives going out to the axles. And these are actually CV style drive shafts up front, like that, much better than dog bones, in this particular setup. Ball bearings throughout, of course. I mean, on a pro vehicle like this, it has to have ball bearings. So yes, ball bearings throughout this entire drivetrain. But the front differential, it feels pretty light. It just feels like it's probably lightly greased. So if you're going to go out and do a little bit more than just have fun with it, you might want to go in there and at least put a heavy grease in there or an oil in there. Let's move on to the steering assembly. Pretty much the Ducono setup. Again, we've got a adjustable steering bell crank over here, a dual bell crank setup with a plastic drag link in between, adjustable tie rods as I mentioned before. Even the center tie rod from the servo arm over is an adjustable tie rod as well. And basically we just got this little plastic front brace setup here. It does feel pretty flexible, just something to be aware of. I mean, we've got this semi-tub going on for the chassis. Might as well move on to the chassis. It's a one-piece setup. And, the front kick plate here is basically a part of the chassis. So it's all one-piece unit, and there is some bracing. You got your sidewalls here, and we got some bracing underneath, but there is a little bit of flex. I did notice that. And one thing that I noticed about this is, and I'll skip over to the battery plate right now. The battery plate's mounted up here with 2 Velcro straps, makes it easy to get your batteries out. But I noticed that there's extra holes drilled in the battery plate, and what you could actually do is you could take this battery plate off and move it down here for a lower CG on it, which is a pretty neat idea. I don't think there's any clearance issues with the body, but that option is there to move it over here, which I think I like. And you could go, and when you do that, you have 4 screws now that hold the battery plate there, and I think it would add some rigidity to the front of this. Or worst cases, I would probably like to see somebody come out with a stiffener plate to go between there. I think that would really help this car out. But that's just me going off, looking ahead. I'm really excited about this, so I want to mess with this more, and I'm already thinking about things to do with it. But now I talked to you about the chassis. Let me talk to you about the electronics. So we've got the Hexfly servo up front here, metal geared servo that we've seen on a number of Redcat vehicles. Over here is a 60 amp waterproof, brushless, sensorless ESC, which is rated 2S and 3S. I see a lot of the paperwork and the website talks about using a 2S battery in this, so I think that's kind of what Redcat's favoring in this. And that powers the 3300 kV motor over here. And there is a T-plug on here, which is nice. It's much better than those those red bullet styles that come on some of the other Redcats. Definitely like that plug over the other one. And then under the speaking controller is the receiver, so it's in its own little protected box under there, and that of course mates up with the radio, which I'll show you in a minute. But that wraps up the chassis, electronics. Let me talk about the center drive line so I don't miss that. So we've got a metal drive shaft from the front gearbox to the center spur gear basically, and it's basically like a spool in the center bolt. What's really cool is it is a metal spur gear in there. I popped the top off just to check it out, and I was really surprised to see a metal spur in there. So that's very cool. Metal motor plate to secure the motor. The only thing I noticed, it looks like it's a little difficult to adjust the pinion gear in there. So if you're going to go beyond what's stock, it looks like it's a process of setting the mesh in there between, taking the motor mount out and tightening things and moving things around. So just kind of be aware of that. Might be a little extra time on the bench if you're swapping out pinion gears. All right, now let's move on to the back of the vehicle. We've got these risers here for the rear shock tower. Definitely a lot of mounting holes there to adjust your shock angle if you want to. And just like the front, we've got those aluminum bodied shocks with the nice caps on there with the bleeder screws, and it does feel really good. I do like the way the suspension feels on this. Little light in the front actually. Once you put the battery in, you might have to adjust the collars a little bit. All right, now let me finish off the rear suspension here. So it is a 4-link setup out to the solid rear axle, and this is your standard setup for a rock racer buggy 4-link setup. But what's nice is Redcat does have a rear sway bar on here with adjustable end links, so I do like that setup. Very nice to see on this buggy. And then the rear axle on this, again, solid rear axle. There is a lockout in the rear differential, so it's it looks like a gear differential, but there's a lockout in here, so it just basically both wheels spin in one direction without any differential action. Seal axles out to the wheels, and one thing I didn't mention up front is there are aluminum wheel hexes on here, 12mm hexes for the wheels to adapt to. So that's nice that it's aluminum right out of the box. You don't have to worry about plastic there. All right, I think that rounds that out. Now the tires and wheels on this, very soft tire on here, nice large lug. I think that's got to do pretty well when you're running through rocks and dirt and stuff like that. Then it's got this really cool looking black spoke wheel on there, chunky black spoke on it. Definitely like the look of those. And overall, it looks like an exciting rock racer package. I think it's going to do really well out there. Really excited to try it out. I'm kind of rushing through this portion of the review because it just stopped raining. I want to go out and run this thing. Let me talk to you about the radio system. So it's the RCR2E. Again, we've used this on a number of Redcat reviews here on the channel. Basic radio system, but it has all the functionality you're going to need underneath this panel, including the on-off switch. It takes 4 AA's. You're going to need 4 AA's for that. And I don't know if I mentioned it before, but you are going to need a battery and charger for the buggy itself. We're going to use a 2S battery to power it during the performance part, which you're going to see in a minute. Let me just finish off what else you get here. So it looks like you get some decals to finish off the look of the body. It does come with a rear tire mount, so that's pretty cool. I think you have to cut out the rear of the body, but you go and mount a additional tire on the back if you want to. Of course, you got to go buy the tire. We've got an antenna and a bind plug, and it looks like we've got a bunch of paperwork for the instructions here. So there's your manual, check that out. And then of course this is your speed controller manual type of stuff. So definitely read through that if you need to reprogram this at all. But everything is set right out of the box. So you just plug your battery in and go. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. I'm gonna go throw a battery in, and we're gonna go have some fun. Driving a rock racer is a pretty unique experience, and I don't get to do it often, but I was able to find some pretty cool spots to go and run this thing and get a good feel for how it goes. And the Camo X4 is a pretty neat truck out there on the rocks, in the dirt, and just generally a lot of fun. And it held up. I mean, I was hitting some serious rocks with this thing, launching it pretty far, and it took the abuse. I was a little worried about that shock tower, remember that? And that held up just fine. But overall, this is a lot of fun, and I could see why a lot of people get into this. So let's talk about some of the performance traits, and let's start off on the suspension side of things. Through the rocks and stuff, I was trying to really hammer down and just rip this thing through there. And what I found out pretty quickly is you really have to finesse through the rocks and stuff, because this thing will get bounced around. Even though it's got a independent front suspension, it's still got this solid rear axle. That kind of causes a little bit of bucking out of the rear, just kind of inherent of the design of it. But there's also some torque twist in this thing, and so if you're just ripping on the throttle a little too much, it will start to kind of unload the front end, and you have a bit more to kind of steer out of and control. So when going through the really rocky stuff, I could just kind of backed out of the throttle and let the truck do its thing, and it kept on course a bit easier. Through the dirt and stuff like that, it definitely kind of soaked up a lot of the bumps and ruts and stuff. But then when you get into turning this vehicle, it's got a lot of steering to it. It could turn in a pretty tight corner, but there is a lot of roll in this chassis setup here. And I was just rolling this thing over a lot until I really got a handle for how it steers, because there is just so much lean to the chassis on this. And from other rock racers that I've driven before, kind of the same thing. You just got to watch yourself in the corners. But as far as the steering servo goes, it seemed to have decent power for getting this buggy turned around. In the loose dirt and stuff like that, it definitely worked just fine. But this is really a driver's vehicle. You really have to be aware of what you're doing when you're driving it. Jumping, it actually jumped pretty well. A little bit of rear up. It kind of happens with this style of vehicle. But again, when you expect it, you know what to do. As far as durability, there's no issues. I really thought I was going to have a problem with the shock tower. I keep harping on the shock tower because of the, what I experienced with the Ducono. Even brought an aluminum shock tower with me just in case something happened, but we're still running on the stock shock tower here just fine. Definitely hit a lot of rocks with this, no issues there. Ran it through some water, it seems to be just fine, no issues. It just seems to be a pretty durable rig. I've seen some guys already driving this thing online, on Instagram and stuff, and they are just putting it through the paces, and nobody's talking about durability issues there. So I didn't experience anything, and I haven't seen anybody else talking about anything yet. The drivetrain seems pretty strong, axles are straight, shock shafts are straight on this, and this thing was hitting a lot of rocks and stuff. And I mean, I even flipped this thing over and landed really hard on the roof, which should have, something should have happened. And, so far so good. Overall, this has just been a lot of fun. It's got a lot of power to it. That brushless system can definitely, spin the tires. A little bit of lag on the bottom end, but, the top end speed is really a blast on this buggy. And I like it. I think, Redcat did a great job on it, and they offer the TT version of it as well. That looks super cool and looks like a lot of fun if you're more into the desert truck style of vehicle. So definitely check that out. But, if you're into this rock racing thing, I say into this rock racing thing. Again, we don't really have it over here, but if you're into rock racing, want to get into it, this might be a great buggy at a great price point to get you off-roading with.